All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanagh, here on a beautiful Thursday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The sun is shining. My kid just finished sixth grade, so we're all pretty excited about that. Things are moving forward, and we're going to talk about a pretty hot topic today. AI and AI governance. Yes, this stuff needs to be governed. You don't want errant AI. I think I just coined that term the other day. I got all excited on LinkedIn. Talked about errant AI. You don't want that. Errant AI is no bueno. When it does wrong things very well, that's not what you're looking for. And of course, with AI, you're talking about AI agents these days, which is a whole separate story from large language models and all the historical deep learning modules that we've had. AI agents are a new thing, and they have a ton of excitement right now. Hear stories of them working well in certain conditions. They do have to be very focused on what they're supposed to accomplish. But as far as I'm concerned, all bets are still off. We don't know how this is going to shake out. You see big maneuvering in the marketplace. You see Salesforce buying Informatica. That tells me a couple things. One, they're buying an install base. Two, they're buying a crucial piece of data infrastructure that has been used for 25 years or so. I'm trying to think how long they've been around. About that long. Power Center came out like 1990s, early 1990s. So 35 years, I guess. They've been around for quite some time, and everybody has Informatica. So almost every Fortune 2000 company, I guarantee, has an Informatica license sitting around somewhere. And so they're buying. I mean, and Mark Benioff is a very smart businessman. If you look at what he's stacked together here, there's obvious overlap between MuleSoft and Informatica. So that's kind of an interesting take. They have Tableau, they have Slack, they have all these other things that they've sort of cobbled together to build what is essentially a giant stack of fairly old technology if you get right down to it. So Salesforce itself is working on the AI component and agent force. They have a lot of energy going behind that. So they clearly see what's happening. But you look at the Informatica acquisition, and maybe we'll just start there real quick and get some thoughts from our guest today, Todd Henley. He's with a company called PaperKite.ai. I love that name. And Todd, you're in the governance space as a consultant, and we talk about AI governance. You've got a long history in this industry. What are your initial thoughts about Salesforce buying Informatica and what that means for AI?
That's a really interesting question. Initially, it's not going to mean anything to those who are already holding licensing, other than to make sure that you understand what your enterprise licensing holds, because your costing is going to be reevaluated, and it's going to probably go up. Every time a software company is acquired, this has a tendency to happen. Now, is that going to signal any changes for the operationalization of Claire, which is their core AI component within their data catalog, and is also connected into all of their other tools, such as ETL, ELT. Are there going to be any changes? Well, yes, there most likely will be. There's probably going to be more of a connection into the Salesforce cloud. It's probably going to be pulled more intimately into that Salesforce cloud. And there are probably going to be more connections from their central data catalog into that cloud as well. So really interesting changes. This acquisition was really made for a purpose. The same as the acquisition of Data.World for ServiceNow. That was a component that was really missing for ServiceNow for a long time. They've had their GRC platform for a long time. They had their service catalog for a long time. They had their catalog for their CDMB, their configuration management database. And I just got the acronym wrong, but they really
No
didn't have.
worry.
Yeah, well, it's yada yada yada. It's all the same thing. You know, but they haven't really had a data catalog connected into it, so they had no way to really build out authorities, ontologies, They had no way to really, build a business glossary other than, cobble something together within their configuration database. So these are really sound moves. It's just, if you're a current license holder, look for things to change and look for things to change in their in your licensing and in the way that the applications are going to be developed, especially within the next 6 months to a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, is that going to change your AI governance space? Well, maybe yes, but it's going to take a little bit longer because there's quite a few organizations, like Monitar, IBM Watson X. A lot of these tools have had a really good running start. So if Salesforce and ServiceNow are going to try to get into that game, it's going to take them a lot of development to get into that space.
Hmm. That's very interesting. When I think about AI governance, well, you got a couple things that come to mind immediately. One is data and the data that you
Hmm.
feed these things. What is going to be the trusted source of data that you feed? There's a whole
Right.
battle brewing right now in that field. I just wrote
Hmm.
an article about this maybe a week ago or so saying, can you hear the dinner bell? Like ding ding, it's time to feed those AI agents. And there's a whole bunch of companies lining up to serve that data. Snowflake, Databricks, obviously Informatica is out there. You got some new companies like
Hmm.
Next Data, for example, Zhamak Dehghani, the data mesh creator.
Hmm.
They're doing some very interesting things. So there's the data side, and there's all the process stuff. And
Hmm.
process to me is the more unwieldy of the two, really. I mean, data is also pretty
Very much
unwieldy, but
so.
you can scan data and pull out metadata tags and things like this. It's stuff that Claire does for Informatica. But
Hmm.
processes are just so unwieldy, and many of them are so bespoke. So there's not a lot of
Right.
documentation for them. I think that
Right.
one of the early wins for agentic AI might just be crawling around system architectures and figuring out what's really out there, which is like the stuff that
Hmm.
Solonis does. Solonis and then Software
Sure.
AG has their ARIS, this whole process mining thing and process orchestration. And I'll get your thoughts on this, but
Hmm.
my general feeling is that if agentic AI works as we want it to work, it's really
Hmm.
going to upend a whole lot of old fashioned bulk lift and shift, heavy duty enterprise processes like ETL,
Absolutely.
like moving data all around and around and around. I think a lot of that stuff is going to
Right.
fade. And,
Hmm.
what does that mean? Well, I remember watching 10, 15 years ago when Informatica was trying to push data virtualization and trying to get it into the cloud. And those power
Hmm.
center sales reps were like, no, 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 no. You leave
Hmm.
our cash cow alone. But what do you
Right.
think about that general thought that agentic AI is probably going to be, if successful, much more lean in terms of what it does than our current way of thinking?
Oh, very much so. Where to even start on that question? Because
Right.
that's really meaty. We're seeing right now a collection of multiple individuals that are in disciplines that had never talked to each other ever before in the
Wow.
past,
That's a
right?
good point.
Yeah, I mean, it's like
That's funny.
we're it used to be that, information governance people didn't really talk to data governance people. It was included in, like ARMA IGBOK, frameworks, as well, there's this data slice over here. Security people and data people didn't really talk. Security people talked about data from a security perspective. Data people talked about security from a data perspective. And also the privacy and ethics people were off, in their ivory towers, and they weren't really talking to anybody in the data or security space, largely. And of course, there are always, pockets of people who really dedicated and have included their perspectives in the process. But when we're talking about a lot of what was traditional, when we're talking about things like ETL, there are companies like Polyphase that have in totally you know, automated the process for ETL, which is really cool. They've got a great concept, a great product. They're really working on, hard on bringing that to a much larger market. Um, I I'm doing some educational content development for an AI training site, and it's really cool. And they've got this whole section on, ETL, ELT, and it's like, well, that's great and all, but have you thought about adding a section, in that module that's specifically on how this is being, automated? Right?
Hmm.
There are multiple opportunities for automating this, and why would you want to do that? Why would you want to automate that? Because sometimes it can be pretty complex. Well, we've got multiple data pipelines that we need to feed for multiple different use cases, agentic AI just being one of them, right? So, when you are filling your agents with the capacity to actually pull in data, hold that in memory, add that to a tool, or apply that to a tool, apply the tool to a specific output, the more that you can build that marketplace of pipelines, the better off you are. So if you can, automate that in a way that, provides high quality data, why wouldn't you?
Right.
So we're seeing use cases being developed now where the chronically underfunded, underappreciated disciplines are now ganging up to actually fulfill the mission of artificial intelligence, agentic AI. Now there are use cases like, hey, there are use cases, and it's like you can do data without AI ML, but you can't do AI ML without data. And here we go.
Right.
Here's the perfect set of use cases. Now let's invest. I think IDC came out with an analysis, and I'm not quoting it. I'm more paraphrasing that for every dollar spent on artificial intelligence, $9 to $10 is spent on getting the data ready for that use case, right?
Wow.
So, the more that we can apply, automation to that, the better off that we're going to be. Now, of course, if agents become errant, that becomes a problem, right?
Right. Yeah, well, there is this whole idea of just-in-time agentic, I suppose. And this is kind of where
Sure.
I'm headed with these things. And you talk about connectors, for example, some of these
Mhm.
newer tools, a little agent can very quickly scan an array of connectors and find the right one, or
Yeah.
find what it thinks is right, try it, doesn't work, try another one. And like these
Mhm.
things can happen very fast. So
Yeah.
like this is one of the nice parts. Now this is what Boomi World was all about, by the way, is their agent control tower, their agent
Hmm.
studio. So building agents, being able to
Right.
manage them. I predict that is going to be the challenge of a lifetime because you got Jensen
Absolutely.
Huang out there saying, I'm going to have millions of AI agents doing stuff. I'm
Mhm.
like, are you sure? Because that's a lot.
Yeah.
Like, what are they doing? Like, at a certain point, you have to
Yeah.
orchestrate things, right? So, how do they not step on each other? How do you detect when they're doing something wrong and kill the
Hmm.
pod? Just knock it down, get rid of it. That's the big question, and I'm not sure where we are. I don't think we have enough hard evidence that people are offering up from their experience with these agents to
Hmm.
let us know what's happening. But when I think about it, this is a sea change. This is a major,
Yes.
major change. It's kind of like the magnitude of Kubernetes and perhaps even
Hmm.
greater. Because think about how
Hmm.
everyone all of a sudden had to refactor for Kubernetes because they realized,
Right.
wow, this is the
Right.
way it's going to
Right.
go. And so we need to
Right.
refactor our tech to work in containers. And that sometimes is
Mhm.
not a very simple thing to do, right?
Sure. Yeah. And how long did it take us to really get to the point where we could operate software modularly effectively, leveraging
Hmm.
APIs, ensuring that there are standards for API calls, how many sets of documentation you have to go through to understand how to call an API appropriately, and to use
Right.
them, in a modular software architecture. So if we're expecting, AI to work agentically with millions of AI agents operating autonomously and not having some sort of issues, with the
Right.
traffic cop, I think we're probably not, looking at it without the rose-colored glasses on, right?
Right.
Yeah, I don't think we're looking at it very, very clearly. It might be a little myopic at that point. Oh,
Well, and I'm guessing that what we're going to see here are environments that are constrained, very specific use cases. And we had a guy on the show the other day from Work Fusion, and they have
hmm.
agents for anti-money laundering. So that's
Yes,
looking for a very distinct
right.
set of behavioral patterns and then
Hmm.
raising a red flag when it finds them. And that to me,
Hmm.
that's a pretty solid use case. Any
Sure.
place where you have like tremendous, tedious work, that was going to be the title of our show today. In fact, repeat
Yeah.
after me, repetitious tasks are no fun. Right. But
Yeah.
they also lower the attention of the user, and this is the big problem with rote tasks and very
Hmm.
tedious tasks is that they do wear down the human
Hmm.
psyche, and so you don't do that well. So that's
Sure.
why I think a lot of the value, and I've got a break coming up in just a second, but I think a lot of the value in the early days of AI implementations will come in the form of suggestions. The AI will
Sure.
say, "Hey, you want to do this? You want to do that?" You can see it already. I
Hmm.
mean, I
Hmm.
think it was Google like 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago, something. You saw the early days of the early Chat GPT models or those early models because it would like start
Right.
finishing your sentences for you and doing things of this
Hmm.
nature. It's like, aha,
Hmm.
this it senses where I'm going and it's offering me this
Right.
quick little mini automation. Now, personally, for me, it's easier just to type out the rest of the words than it is to grab the
Yeah.
mouse and move it and click or whatever. So it's like,
Or hit
sometimes
tab.
automation is useful and sometimes it's very
Yeah.
not terribly useful. But folks,
Sure.
don't touch that dial. I'll be right back talking to Todd Henley of PaperKite. PaperKite AI is the name of the company. We're talking all about repetitious tasks and how that feeds into AI governance. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio talking to Todd Henley of PaperKite AI, right down the street from me. I'm up here in Pittsburgh. He's over in Columbus. We're neighbors, sort of, kind of, and good heartland, Rust Belt, get things done, focus, work, work, work. And I think about the impact that this new form of automation, let's like the AI agent is basically a dynamic automation engine, if you will. It's like an automation automaton, right? Because it's making decisions and then it's automating various things to get stuff done. Well, you can, if you just think for a minute, you realize these things could get errant pretty quickly. There was
Mhm.
that I don't know if you saw this video. There was a video out of China a couple of weeks ago of one of these robots, like a humanoid robot that just freaked out and started flailing around. The guys were like, "Whoa!" They had to back off and like unplug him. It was like, "All right, we got to be careful, guys. You put a gun in a robot's
Yeah.
hand and it might just
Yeah.
shoot you." You know what I mean? It's like these things they're classification engines. They're like, what do I do now? What do I do now?
Yeah.
So anyway, where I'm going with this is that this could be huge. I mean, maybe that's part of the reason why Salesforce just bought Informatica to kind of round out the install base, to have every piece of functionality they might want, and to get
Hmm.
that data component. Because you said something earlier in the show that really aligned, or maybe before the show even, with one of my themes, which is get your data house in order. And this is
Right.
something that's, we had problems swept under the rug for 30 to 40 years. And guess what? It's time to finally do that spring cleaning, do a real brass tacks assessment of your information landscape, and clean that puppy up before you start pointing algorithms at it, right?
Absolutely. And I really appreciate your RoboCop reference, putting a gun in a robot's hand.
Yeah.
Sometimes that doesn't end up well. Going back to your example of BSA AML, there's so much of that can be automated, and you're taking a lot of the friction out of the process for recognizing suspicious activity. But there are things about it that cannot be automated. When you get to the point where there's a SAR, suspicious activity report,
Right.
And you go to provide that to regulatory agencies, there's a lot of that process that really cannot be automated and has to be reviewed by a human. There are other areas where there's a lot of planning that does not include that review by a human, which could be problematic. Where we've had the problem before, with feeding with the BSA AML, I mean, it's a great example of something that's proactive as opposed to using something like Verifin or Actimize, which is, you're looking at months in the past for
Mm-hmm.
for suspicious activity. So, leveraging these tools right now, is a great help. But the problem is getting the right data to it. So you're looking at SIP data, your customer information profiling data, making sure that that's clean. You're also looking at, credit card data, wealth management. There's a lot that gets put into the models that are used for BSA AML reporting and looking for indicators of suspicious activity. But that's a great use case for starting out with, okay, what are your data sets that you need to feed into it? And start working on those data sets, individually. The biggest problem with data quality has always been, are you looking at it from a supply side or are you looking at it from a demand side? And when you're looking at a supply side, you've got your entire enterprise worth of data that you need to ensure is of reasonable quality, right? When you're looking at your demand side, it's like, well, I'm only interested in this, and this, and it has to be at this level of quality. That's great. But now we have all these tools that can help us to automate both supply side and demand side. And we're in a much better position now than we ever have been. It used to be in the past where, data quality, well, actually it is still, because the tools aren't really quite there. But it's becoming less and less of a problem now where you have to create these very, very large enterprise data quality initiatives that involve everybody in the company and the folks at home, right? To actually get to a point where you can say this data set is of this level of quality. Here are the metrics, right? That's a very hard thing to do, and it can take years to get to that point. But now we're in a use case scenario where we have, we've vetted through all of our use cases for artificial intelligence. We've said we're going to do something like BSA AML. Here are the data sets that we're using. Let's knock them down one by one. And oh, by the way, here are these tools that can help us to do that. Some of those tools didn't exist, and I'm hoping that in the near future, there's going to be a little bit more development in that space, from the acquisition of Salesforce and Informatica and with ServiceNow and Data.World.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the data.world one took me by surprise, but it really shouldn't have. I mean, they've been
Mhm.
around for a good long while, and as I recall, they were first designed to handle global data all over the world. They wanted to be a
Right.
sort of glossary or a catalog for all data, and then they realized, hey, we can make some money if we focus on the enterprise. So
Yeah,
that was
that's
probably a good idea because you got to make sense of these things. I mean, that kind of gets to another interesting thread in this overarching topic of automation and AI and the power that it can bring and getting your data
Mhm.
house in order is the semantics, the semantic layer. Now,
Right.
who was it? Databricks is rolling out their own semantic layer. Of course, at scale has
Mhm.
been doing this stuff for a while.
Right.
I remember when I was early in this industry back in 2002, I picked up a client called QualAware and he was talking about their metadata repository. And I was like, everyone has their own metadata repository. Would it make sense for there to be a sort of master metadata repository that we could
Uh,
all kind of tap into? And that's
uh,
like an ontology, right? Which kind of makes sense of
sure.
a space. And that's a great place to start because the problem with the large language models is that they're so large and they're unwieldy.
Mhm.
And as such, they're unpredictable and they're hard to manage. And so these ontologies, semantic layers, they're very useful knowledge graphs, for example, which is kind of like a
Mhm.
semantic layer, a knowledge graph. If you build
Mhm.
one of those out, I think that's a clever move. One of the companies that I think is very forward looking. We've worked with this Data Squared and John
Mhm.
Bruton and
Sure.
um, Dan, it's a Polish name, escapes me. Bukowski, that's his name, Charles
Okay.
Bukowski, Dan
Okay.
Bukowski. But
Okay.
what they do is they build a knowledge graph for you. So you have your enterprise data down here, they build a knowledge graph on top. Then that connects to MCP and that connects to the LLM. Now you've
Right.
got a nice chain of command going through there where
Right.
different kinds of functionality are natural and intrinsic and work well. And you
Hmm.
capture the richness of the enterprise data without making it publicly available, for example. You let the LLM talk through the MCP to your graph to get some more context. That's really getting somewhere, right?
Sure, absolutely. And it's really interesting. Semantic layers are not new. And also, what is not new is the idea of the industry accelerator.
Hmm.
So every company has had their own industry accelerator that has something akin to a semantic layer or something that can be used as a semantic layer. So if you look at, IBM had this with, what was their product before, Cloud Pak for Data. So it'd been around for like 30 years.
Infosphere.
Yes, Infosphere. Infosphere has a whole range of industry accelerators that have, semantics for, multiple different sets of business terms per industry, that could be used to build your semantic layer. So these have been around for a long time. I think at scale does a very good job at building a global semantic layer that can be used for regardless of what your industry vertical is. They do a very good job at putting together this global semantic layer and making it actually useful. Of course,
Hmm.
as you mentioned, they're not the only ones who are trying to crack this nut. I mean, there are multiple organizations trying to do that, but it's interesting, like I was talking about before, how um, having this actual use case, like, automation through agentic AI, or just, artificial intelligence, machine learning to begin with, has caused us to start, to invest and investigate in areas that we probably didn't look at before,
Hmm.
such as building, semantic layers. So, a lot of interesting things, coming up.
Yeah. Well, it is going to be very, very interesting in the near future. And I'll throw another theory at you when I think about the tumultuous change that these large language models and foundational models in general are bringing. It is, like I say, similar to what we saw with Kubernetes, where you have to refactor.
Mhm.
And so I'm thinking now, software companies themselves need to take a look at this and figure out, okay, where do we fit in this new world?
Right.
Are we going to be part of a RAG model? Is that going to be our play? Are we going to be
Hmm.
one of the remaining deterministic systems? Because you'll still need deterministic ERP, deterministic accounting. These things cannot be fuzzy, right?
Hmm.
I mean,
Right.
the large language models are fuzzy because they're probabilistic in nature, so they're good at stochastic use cases, but they're not
Hmm.
so good at deterministic use cases. So
Right.
and what's interesting to me too is like you think about in the history of the database, all the way back 40, 50 years, we
Hmm.
realized this is the foundation of information systems, the database where the data is stored.
Right.
And we worked for
Right.
decades improving the performance, more concurrent
Hmm.
users, faster speeds, all these things. But one thing that was never in question was accuracy. You would always get out what you put in,
Sure.
right?
Right.
And now you take these large language models, it's like throwing a noise filter on the end of this long, pristine process. So it's like, well, wait a minute.
Right.
Why would you do that? Like, it's like
Yeah.
throwing the baby out the bathwater, right? But the obvious
Yep.
reason is because there's tremendous power in them. But my
Hmm.
point is that we're on kind of like a defensive posture with this technology, trying to stop it from doing things, right?
Right. Well, there's one thing, since we're talking about AI governance, there's one area that I think many people may not necessarily think about, but when you're talking about AI governance, you're looking at, artificial intelligence from, cradle to grave, right? So you're looking at everything from, how you're evaluating your use cases to, how does this position the organization in the future to, okay, now we're developing this, or we're implementing it, we're putting it into production. Then there's the maintenance cycle, and then there's the eventual disposition. Well, before you get to the part where you've actually set your agent loose on the world, there's a whole evaluation phase that you need to go through. So you got to look at it in terms of your model. Does your large language model actually understand what it is that you're asking it to do? And does it have enough level of semantic differentiation between what it is that you're asking it to do and what it thinks you're asking it to do?
Right,
And
right.
also from a systems approach, right? So, the system in which you've let your agent loose, is it actually doing what it's supposed to do? Is it removing the friction within that system that it was designed to remove? So there's this whole evaluation phase that you have to go through for any AI system that you implement. But you really need to look at it, at agents a little bit more thoroughly, because they're supposed to be, making decisions on their own. You're supposed to be giving
Right.
them tools to actually do something. Now, did you give them the right tools? Do they have the right data? Are they interpreting the data the right way? Are they using the tools the correct way? So, it can become very complex. AI governance is there to not necessarily tell you what your evaluation technique should be, but as to whether or not the question's been asked, and answered, to anyone's satisfaction, that that the agent is doing what it's supposed to be doing, and it has been evaluated thoroughly. Like, I'm not going to tell anyone that they should be using Lime or SHAP for explainability for any AI system. I'm not going to tell them that, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask them the question, and be a little bit more, not necessarily interrogative, but we're going to have a conversation on that and say, well, is this adequate for, what this AI system is designed to do and your expected output?
Yeah. I mean, that's a really, really good point. We got another break coming up here in just a second, folks. So send me an email if you want to be on the show, info@dmradio.biz. We are building out the rest of the EdCal for this year right now, as a matter of fact. And as you can guess, we're going to be talking a lot about AI. And, it's funny because we used to map out the whole year ahead of time. And you kind of can't do that anymore because things are just moving too fast. So we got a whole bunch of TBDs in the EdCal. So send me an email, info@dmradio.biz, and we will get you in there somehow, some way. But don't touch the dial. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking to Todd Henley of PaperKite.ai. And Todd, as I think about getting your data house in order, the big question is, okay, how do you do that? There aren't too many
Yeah.
companies that are focused on that. There are a couple out there. There's Praxi, Praxi. We've done some work with those guys. There's Shelf.io, which is kind of interesting. They'll
Yes.
scan your entire environment and see everything you have and then kind of alert you as to, okay, this might be some PII, this might be an
Right.
incomplete file, stuff like that. And then someone has to start hacking away and taking a look at that. And guess what? That's going to be humans at the end of the day.
Hmm.
There's Hammer Space, which is one of my favorite companies that we work with.
Yeah.
Not too many people have heard about them, but they will. They do
Mhm.
unstructured data orchestration and give you this global namespace for all your data. So it's like a parallel
Right.
file system that sits on top and allows you to see everything in every file system, whether it's in Azure or
Hmm.
S3 or on-prem. They don't care. And then you can
Hmm.
start building policies and sort of scanning through, because we always say don't boil the ocean, but when it comes to AI, you're going to have to find a way to get the ocean boiled. Like one
Yeah.
way or another, or
Yeah.
obviously stay focused and get some certified set of data, use that. But typically
Right.
they're going to want these models want a lot of data. They want to consume a lot of data to
Right.
train because you're just training the parameters, right? The weights and balances
Hmm.
and parameters, which is a
Hmm.
different thing from just persisting data. That's why they're probabilistic, but it's also why they're so good at like picking up on things that you wouldn't think they'd be able to pick up on.
Hmm.
But let's just dive
Absolutely.
into advice on cleaning up your data house. How should people do that?
Well, it used to be where we were trying to boil the ocean one thimble at a time. Now we gotta do it one glass at a time, or one teacup at a time. So
Right.
what I mean by that is I made the reference earlier to, supply side data quality versus demand side data quality. That doesn't change.
Mm.
I really have an appreciation for shelf.io. I have an appreciation for Ingenious Data Works, who is going to be, new to the market. You'll be hearing more about them in the future. Um, but the fact is that you're still using data for a specific use case. Curation is still very important. I started off talking about, how there are people that are talking that have not been talking before. There are disciplines that have been, critically underfunded for decades that are now being looked at as, oh, we kind of disregarded the goose that's laying golden eggs. So I'm talking
Right.
records and information management, content management, content governance. All of these disciplines were kind of like pushed to the wayside, or it was just for the nerds, the information nerds, off in the corner. It's great to have a really good picture, a great map of what you have available, but that does not stop you from having to curate that data for specific use cases,
Right.
curating that information, for specific use cases. So, when you're looking at what those use cases are, you create a marketplace, a curated marketplace, because when it's in its parent system, when information's in its parent system, or in its system of record, the context of it is set. So the quality of that, the knowledge that is included around that data is set by that context. So you may not be able to make any changes to it at all. So the quality may
Mm.
be as is. Like if you're talking about wealth management, that data comes from someplace else and you have absolutely no control over it whatsoever. How you use it, on the other hand, may require some enhancements, some annotation, and all of that requires curation. This starts in the AI governance process by saying, hey, here are use cases. Here's our portfolio of use cases. We are going to start with this use case or that use case. Start by figuring out what use cases can have a level of reusability, especially at the data layer, right? So
Hmm.
it's like we've done a SIP data cleanup, and we are going to reuse that not just for SIP communication with regulators, not just for BSA AML activities, but we're going to use that for some analytics, which is really cool, right? Assuming that you're going to use it in a responsible and ethical way, right? So you pull, multiple use cases together that can reuse a lot of the same data, and boom, you've got a multiplier, right? So
Hmm.
now you can curate that data into a data set that is, again, highly curated, and you know what the parameters are that says that this is cool and is usable for artificial intelligence or for AI agents, agentic AI use cases.
Mm.
Um, so having all of these tools that can work on the supply side is great. It's wonderful, but it doesn't excuse you from actually doing the work on the demand side to make it usable for that context.
Yeah, that's really good advice. That makes a lot of sense. And I've heard a lot of folks have classifications, bronze, silver, gold. Bronze
Right.
is okay for playing around with. Silver is
Sure.
better, but obviously gold for production use cases. You want to make
Mhm.
sure that data is of the highest quality. And
Absolutely.
we're looking, we're talking about automation and how do you automate like
Mhm.
tricks, and I'm sure there are going to be ways to do that when you find a file that is incomplete, figure out what's
Mhm.
incomplete, run a report on it, either flesh it out yourself or hand it off to a person to take a look at. I mean, we're really going to continue to see this human and machine interaction. It's just going to be
Absolutely.
changing, and I think the machines are going to be doing more, and we're going to be doing a little bit less. But trying to be coaches, really, I mean, that's I think that's
Mhm.
probably going to be the magic
Sure.
is the AI agent coach. How do you
Mhm.
work with the AI agent to kind of nudge it in the direction it needs to go? Uh, that's probably going to be an art more of a science. What do you think?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are some really cool things that OpenText is doing right now. So
Hmm.
if you look at what they've done with the Kennedy archives, which a lot of these documents are decades old and they've been annotated. There's been marginalia that's been added for decades and decades, and some of it's been reclassified. It's no longer top secret. Now it's made public. So there are changes, strike throughs and changes to the classification, and there's annotation as to who's made those changes. There are stamps all over these documents. And when you start to OCR those, you get a lot of artifacts that are included in the text output, right?
Mm,
The digital text output. The collaboration between human being and agent right now is taking a look at, what is the most probable understanding of what these artifacts are based on, what was seen in the original document. Was this a stamp that was, added by the National Security Agency? Is this a stamp that was added by records? Is this some sort of marginalia that was added at some point in the recent past that adds a little bit more color commentary to the content of the document? Or some other annotations, like changes to classification. There's going to be a lot of interplay between, humans and agents, training them to be able to deal with those artifacts, and change those or update those artifacts in the digital copy.
hmm.
So it's really interesting, when you're looking at it from a records management perspective. This changes a lot of what was considered to be, traditional, approaches to digitization of commonly held, or not commonly held, but records that you would normally want to digitize, right? These are
Hmm.
things that have some sort of value, historical value. They could add analytic value, something that is going to, maintain either a government's or a company's history.
Right.
So a lot of really interesting changes that can be brought about by that relationship.
Yeah, it's going to be wild. So we got our podcast bonus segment coming up next, folks. We'll talk about the specific job and work functions that we're going to be engaging in, and Todd was just hinting at them right there. But don't touch it. That'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. Okay, folks, back here on DM Radio, time for the podcast bonus segment. We've got Todd Henley of PaperKite talking about how things are changing, and there's gonna be work for the people, man. You're seeing this. I heard Klarna laid off a whole bunch of people, and what was it? They were talking about how they had replaced hundreds of apps with an AI engine, but then it started to go south. And so bad things can happen here. You got to be careful how you move through. Don't just go laying off a whole bunch of people thinking that everything's going to be fixed. You need to figure out what are the people going to be doing. We want to be letting these agents perform tasks, and I'm pretty sure this AI agent coach is going to be a thing. I'm going to try to write that down because you want to watch out for
Right.
the errant AI, because errant AI is a thing. It's already happening. It's already doing weird things. I see it even in my phone, the automation that they try to bake in, like, oh, did you want to do this? No. Oh, did you want to do that? No, I didn't. Please, just stop telling me what to do. I know real writers out there who don't like that every time they click a Google, it's like, help me write. I don't want you to help me write. I will write. Okay. Like there are other things maybe. And shouldn't you be tracking that? Shouldn't you notice that I never, ever, 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 ever use the help me write thing? Like maybe,
Mhm.
but this is like the personal models, right? Like we're talking about large language models that are very big and unwieldy, but there are going to be lots of smaller models, which I think are probably going to
Yep.
rule the day when push comes to shove. But the whole key is to figure
Right.
out, all right, well, what is the workflow going to be now? How is it going to change what I do day to day? And I think that depends on the company, on the use case, on the business model, on the people. It depends on everything, right? What do you think?
Absolutely. What's the work going to be like tomorrow? And it is going to be it is going to, include those who are able to actually work with AI agents and
Mm.
and to be able to coach them. And, what we're seeing a lot of is, in terms of layoffs, are people that did actually work on building some of those AI systems, but then they've had to bring a lot of people back to actually, fix some of the things like, well, we didn't really take this into consideration. Um, what we're also going to be seeing is, as you had mentioned, small language models or the key differentiator to actually bringing value. And that's another thing. A lot of organizations are working on AI, but aren't necessarily driving value.
Hmm.
As an organization, either to their customers or to the organization itself, right? So if you're going to provide, value to your customers, you're going to be providing value to the organization. But the differentiator is going to be, the people who understand the data that's going to be fed into those AI systems.
Right.
And the differentiator of the data is the data that you have as an organization. The data is what sets you apart. It has the history of everything that was, done as, in the name of your
Right.
organization. So
Right.
if you're looking at just large language models that are going out to the internet, what you're getting is, and here's a white paper that I wrote that's going to be published here soon, is that when you're looking at best practices for choosing the right AI governance framework of those that are commonly available, what you're going to get is not best practices. And the reason why is because one person wrote an article that said, here are the best practices, and they just basically listed components of an AI framework. So now every other AI generated article on AI governance and best practices for implementing frameworks, they're just listing, components of a framework. Those aren't best practices. And the reason why we've got this glut of articles that tell you these are the
Hmm.
best practices is because that's what one person wrote. And now AI is,
Isn't
rewriting
that wild?
the same article, right? So
Right. Wow.
right. So your key differentiator is going to be your data. So understanding what the data is, and able, being able to bring that to bear to your AI systems, your generated AI systems, is going to be the key differentiator between, you know, those who are able to work with artificial intelligence and those who are not. Right.
Mm. Wow, that's a really, really, really good point. Error propagation is what you're alluding to with that best
Exactly.
practices, right? It picked up on something. It's like when
Right.
you get someone's name wrong in your head and then you just cannot overwrite that data. You keep referring to them by the same wrong name. It's like, no, I have to remember
Yep.
it's Heather, not Mary, for example. I mean, I've had that happen to myself, and it's weird. It's a weird function of the brain, just kind of
Yep.
latches onto something. And I've noticed that about these models. I've heard one of my friends is a developer, and he was saying, be careful using fake data in a
Yeah.
model to train a model because it will get
Right.
stuck on that fake data and you will not be able to get it
Absolutely.
out. If you look at
Absolutely.
when you try to iterate with these models, they're not so good at that. It's really just like a first shot that gives you an
Mhm.
interesting view of the world, and then you can kind of massage that. But like, especially with images, we were trying with the logo to get it to fine tune a logo. No, not so good.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
so good
Yeah.
at fine
Yeah.
tuning because it's still doing the same thing every time. It's still
Right.
ingesting the prompt, mapping it against its training, and then issuing
Uh,
some answer. And that's
yep.
not really a fine tuning process. It's
Right.
a great process for prototyping. I mean, it's great for
Yes.
that. So with code,
Right.
with language, with graphics, whatever, it's great for getting you a start and kind of getting the process rolling. But typically, you're
Yep.
going to have to get a professional to kind of finish the job. Is that your impression too?
Oh, absolutely. People in the privacy space love synthetic data. they love the whole concept of synthetic data, and it's completely understandable. Whenever you can use something that looks real but isn't real, that's always an optimal position to be in for a privacy person, but not
Hmm.
necessarily someone who's training a model. It's there's a whole new set of problems that are introduced, and a lot of the organizations that are building out some of these new tools for understanding your data landscape and ecosystem. They rail against synthetic data and having it available to even look at for their tool. It's like
Right.
Ingenious DataWorks. They're pretty adamant of not using it at all, or having it available for them to scan. 'Cause it
Right.
even causes problems with their scanning tools. So
Right.
yeah.
It's weird. I mean, we really have to play around, and I think that's the closing message I'll throw out there is, folks, you got to spend time playing around with these tools. You really have to, because they are a new set of functionality, and it's like putting on new skis, for example. You got to spend a little time on the short slopes to get it right before you start trying to do the moguls. But final thoughts from you, Todd.
But yeah, I think the Bunny Hill is probably a good place to stay for
Yeah.
a little bit, but you can't stay there forever.
Right.
You have to get to the what is it, Black Diamond? It's
Yeah.
in your ski career.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Well, look this gentleman up online. Todd Henley, Henley, PaperKite AI is the company. Very cool stuff. Very good consulting. Good advice, folks. Good advice can save you a lot of time and effort and headache, and that's why you go to people who know things. And with that, we'll bid you farewell, folks. You've been listening to DM Radio.